lilDENNiS has said we've got to shut our eyes for this one. I don't know what he's up to. I think him and little Kitty are up to something, so let's shut our eyes. Matches? What are you doing, lilDENNiS? lilDENNiS says we can open our eyes now. Woo! Hey! lilDENNiS, he's brought us a little birthday cake. Oh yeah, we've got a cake. Hello, this is Sophie Lawson from sophielawson.com, and this is episode 200 of the Sophie Art Podcast, which is a little podcast that I do about the art and things. And today is our birthday. It's episode 200. So if you're watching on YouTube at youtube.com/SophieLawson, you'll not only be able to see lilDENNiS wearing a party hat, but all the guys are here. All the boys, Clive the Chicken, Monty, little Kitty, they've all got party hats on. And he's actually brought me a cake. They've all brought me a cake. So we're going to celebrate episode 200, but he said we've got to blow out the candles and make a wish. So here we go, let's make a little wish. Ah, thank you, lilDENNiS. Got a little kiss. Little Kitty and lilDENNiS kisses. So this one, we forgot something. Balloons. We've also got balloons. We like balloons. Yeah, I forgot about the balloons. I'm probably going to get popping balloons now. But yeah, we've got balloons as well. Boing! Do you know what I like about balloons? Is blowing up balloons and then letting them go. Watch this. It's actually quite hard to blow these ones up. Whew. And then what I like doing is letting it go and it blows around the room. Woo! So this one here, well, who wants a slice of birthday cake? Does anybody want a slice of birthday cake? Because I am actually quite hungry today. What we're going to do on this one is, well, there's a couple of things. The main thing is I'm going to go right back to the beginning and listen to episode 0, which is the very first one. So technically this is episode 201. But I find it quite amazing really that we made it this far. So I'm going to go back to episode 1, replay it, and we'll listen to it together. And I'm just going to talk about some things that come up, because I haven't listened to that since I first recorded it. So episode 0 actually went out on January the 28th, 2018, and today, the day of recording, is January the 28th, 2022. How cool is that? So it's exactly 4 years since we started this podcast, and it's really gone quite weird. I would say the last 4 years has been the most change in my life ever, I think, and I do think a lot of it is for this podcast. So what I'll do as well is I'm going to talk about all the other 200 episodes. So we're going to go right through each episode one by one, very quickly though, only like 30 seconds or something, and just talk about the topics, because what I've noticed is you can talk about something, years later you've got completely different like thoughts about it. So that, I think that'd be quite cool. And then we've also got a little quote. But the thing is, I heard a song this morning, and I thought it's the one. Don't become radio. And I noticed some of the lyrics. So one of them was "Don't become some background noise," which I like that. Now I'm sure there was something. I've not really listened to those lyrics before, but I'm sure it said something about like make some noise so you can set them free when you're not around. So I feel like that song is actually quite powerful. So I want to re-listen to that later. So what I'm going to do, let's start with episode 0. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play it and talk about what comes up. Now this is going to be very strange because Clive's died. Clive the chicken just fell over. This is going to be quite weird though, because because I haven't heard this before, I feel like it's going to be a bit sort of emotional, and also maybe a little bit sort of might trigger some sort of negative things. I'm not sure, but this one was called An Introduction, episode 0. lilDENNiS didn't even exist then. Yeah, because lilDENNiS, I think lilDENNiS came into the podcast as a co-host around about episode 70 or something. But, well, let's get into this one. Doing! So lilDENNiS gets us started. He's going to sit in his little house today with Kitty, with their little party hats on, which I think's cool. But what I also want to say is thank you for listening and watching this podcast. It's been brilliant, it has, and I get quite a lot of messages from people saying they enjoy the podcast and stuff. So I thank you for that. I do appreciate it. But I would also say, don't ever do something for anyone else. I know it sounds weird, because if I was doing this podcast for other people, I don't think I would have kept doing it. I think the reason I've managed to get to episode 200 is because really, like I said earlier, I think this is helping me a lot, like mentally and stuff, doing this. And you learn a lot about yourself, and you're pushing yourself through like facing fears and things. Let's listen to this though. This is episode 0, and the little thing for it, I said it's alive. The So Free Art podcast is go, 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 which was because I love Formula 1, and Murray Walker used to say go, go, go. So that's what I put that in there as a little thing. And then it says, join me for this little introductory episode. This is only 8 minutes long. It's funny though, this is 8 minutes long, but I remember it taking me about 3 hours to record it, because I'd never done anything like this before, and it was very scary. But here we go. Hey, that's the original music.
Hello, this is Sophie Lawson from sophielawson.com, and
Didn't even do the clicks then.
this is actually a little bonus episode I'm going to throw out first, which I'm going to call episode 0.
Like
And it's more just like an introduction to what the podcast is going to be about. And this is the So Free Art podcast, which you can find at sofreeart.com. And it's going to be a little weekly podcast I do, just about things to do with art. So there might be times when I
Art and Tings.
say look at art books, or look at different drawing exercises. Some of them will be talking about my experiences at life drawing class, going to exhibitions, basically just anything really to do with art is going to be covered on the show. But also a large part of it, I think, will be talking about some of the mental things, because what I've noticed is that a lot of art, or a large part of being an artist, is actually overcoming fears.
Isn't it weird? When I first started this podcast, I actually was going to have 2. I was going to have the art one, and I was going to have another one which was called Being So Free, which was going to be all about like transgender things. Now the thing that's funny is, 2018 I had never had a lucid dream before. I was meditating, but I wasn't like super spiritual. I guess I was, but I didn't realise. But what's happened is, since this podcast, something opened up, and that's why this podcast went in a completely different direction to what I thought it was going to be. And yet in a strange way it's still the same, because it's still talking about art things, and it's still talking about the mind and stuff. So it's not the thing. This podcast is nothing like I thought it would be, but it's still covering the same sort of topics. And also it's weird hearing myself talking then, because it sounded a bit different. Bit weird.
There's like the fear of what are people going to think of my art. Like there's the fear of putting yourself out there. There's the fear of having to face rejection. There's the fear of trying new things. There's the fear of trying things and knowing that they're potentially going to suck until you get better, which is a bit like this podcast.
Yes.
I know that the first few episodes of this will probably not be that amazing, but what I've learned through art is if you keep doing something, in the end it will get better.
Repetition is the key to learning. Practice the key to success. That's Lee Hammond, that is. I feel like that quote's probably one of the best quotes ever. Because what's weird, that's the best thing about art is, it showed me that everything's the same. Like no matter what you're doing, all you got, if you keep doing it, you're going to get better at it. Which is weird. But then that also I know, because moving forward I want to start interviewing guests on the podcast. This is what it's all about here, look. Facing fears, fear of rejection. So in a weird way, that is like another step. But I feel like that's the biggest step. Because I was thinking about this morning. Like the podcast, when you're doing it on your own, you're facing fears, but you've got a sort of a safety net. Because you know if you mess up or something, it doesn't really matter. Because it's only you. But if you're interviewing somebody and you start messing up, or you get one of these mind attacks, it could like derail you. All of a sudden you've got somebody else there, and that's different, because now there's a sort of a pressure there. So that's the thing, that's my biggest fear at the minute, is this trying to get the courage, I suppose, to interview guests on the podcast. But if I look at this podcast now, it's evolved, you can sort of take confidence from that. I think that's why I like looking back at things sometimes, because you see how much you've grown. Because when as you're growing, you don't realise you're growing. I don't think sometimes it's only when you look back you realise.
And
cool.
So I guess the podcast will mimic art in that way. In that they may not be amazing to start with, but just keep practicing and it will get better. So that's sort of what I'm thinking for the podcast. It's going to be a weekly one, like I say, every Sunday. Some of them might be 10-20 minutes, some of them might be longer, it depends. I'm not going to force them to be a certain length. I think that would be a bit silly. But there's other things as well, actually. I'm going to be talking about some of my inspirational artists, because I love looking at other artists' work, but I also find it really interesting to look at the work and try to, analyse. Look at their work and try to work out why I like it.
Yeah.
You know, looking at the colours, the lines, stuff like that. So I think those might be quite fun episodes to just go into detail on each artist that I like and try to work out what I like about them.
I've sort of done that on the videos. I feel like what happened was the YouTube videos have done a lot of the things I was going to do on the podcast, because what I've noticed, a lot of these things I wanted to do on the podcast, they're more sort of visual things. So I think some things work better as videos. So a lot of that is actually, I'm doing it, but it's on, like I said, on the videos, especially with the art books and that. When I'm looking at art books, I love that. I feel that for me is the best way. There's a beauty to that. It's a way of learning without sort of studying, because some of studying I find tedious. But when you're going through a book, it's inspirational. But if you're sort of analysing it as you're looking at it, you're sort of like getting both things. You're getting fun, but you're also learning, which is cool.
That's another idea for podcasts. I thought I'd also do a little bit about, a bit about my background. So I'm a transgender artist from Plymouth in England, and you may notice from time to time that my voice goes a bit weird and stuff. That's just because I've had loads of operations on my vocal cords.
Vocal cords?
Yeah, the vocal cords. And so the air doesn't sometimes get through properly, which is why I might have to do a lot of swallowing and stuff, but I'll try to edit some of it out, but some of it might make it its way in, which it's just the way, that's just part of the, I guess that would be part of the show.
That's mad, isn't it?
So I basically started drawing in 2013, and I started out wanting to bring some video game characters to life, which was actually the female characters from Persona 4. I fell in love with them.
GA.
I just felt really inspired to start drawing because of that game, and then I wanted to design my own characters. And the more I started learning how to draw, I actually found myself going down a realistic pencil route. So I spent a few years basically practicing realistic pencil.
I've just noticed something. Even my art, if you want to call it a journey or something, it's been the same as this podcast. When I started out drawing, I thought I was going to do just 100% characters, but it naturally went into realistic, and then it went from there. It naturally come back into characters and stuff. So again, when I started drawing, I would never have thought I was going to start doing realistic stuff. So it's the same as the podcast. When I started doing the podcast, I would never have known I was going to be talking about spiritual things on it. So it's weird. There's something to that. So sometimes I feel like we're some sort of conduit to something, because something told me to start a podcast, and I resisted it for years because I was too scared. I thought, I can't do a podcast. I used to say not with my voice and that. So I put it off, and this was facing a fear. And the funny thing is, as soon as I faced that fear with the podcast, I started having lucid dreams, which were powerful, and then I started talking about them on a podcast. And I do sometimes wonder whether something, might sound weird, something made me do the didn't make me, it said, look, the best thing for you would be to do a podcast, and it waited for me to do it. As soon as I accepted the challenge, it started flowing, these lucid dreams, because it knew that I would talk about them on a podcast. So it's almost like as if something was using me to talk about lucid dreaming or something. I'm getting exactly the same vibe about interviewing guests on a podcast. I've got this thing. Oh, somebody's coming out for something. I'll have to start the podcast in a minute. Well, I'll pause it. But what's happened is, I've lost my train of thought there. What was happening there? I don't know. But it's something along the lines of you plan what you're going to do. You will always end up doing it, I think. But the way you get there is totally not like you think. Yeah, and the other thing was this fear thing. So it must have been about episode, well, it was right about episode at least 50, I started thinking about interviewing guests on the podcast. So it's 150 episodes later, which must be about 3 years, and I still haven't interviewed, well, I have. I've interviewed my sister and my niece. So I have actually interviewed guests on the podcast, but I want to interview people who I don't know, but also people I look up to, like spiritual masters and artists. People who I know will help me and also help the world. Because I think that's what it's all about, really. But the thing is, it's the fear. So I know that fear is an illusion, but the thing that's funny is it feels so real. And the only way you can break the illusion is to do it. But it's this sort of catch-22 thing where to put an end to the fear, you've got to do it. But to do it, you feel like you've got to get rid of the fear. But you can't get rid of the fear until you do it. So in other words, if you're waiting for the fear to go away, you're never going to do it. Which is like this podcast. In the end, I just did it. But also, what's quite funny is this podcast here, episode 0, or actually, before I even started doing the podcast, I had recorded about 20 episodes on my own. And what I was doing was, I was just recording podcasts, talking to myself, and then I was editing them as if there was a real podcast, and that was it. I was only doing it for myself. So I did that for 20 episodes, because then I thought, well, I'll see if I enjoy the process of creating a podcast. I'll also be practicing without actually putting myself out there. And also, it was just a way of, like, easing myself into it, really, I suppose. So I would say that's quite a good little tip, actually. If you wanted to start a podcast, but you're a bit afraid to do it or something, I would say actually do it for yourself. So record a podcast as if you're doing a proper podcast, but you know that you're not going to ever put it out there. So that gives you a bit of safety. And then by the time you come around to do the proper podcast, because you've practiced it, you've taken away one of those sort of barriers. So what I thought to myself was, right, I need to interview guests on a podcast, so let's actually start. What can I do in a way that is going to make it a bit easier for myself? So I thought, right, if I interview my sister, if I mess up in front of my sister, it doesn't matter, because it's my sister. It doesn't matter. So that was like a bit of a safety thing, and I was hoping that I could interview my mum. Yeah, my mum, she won't let me interview her, which is a shame at the moment, anyway. But I thought if I interview my sister and my niece, I would have the confidence to interview, I want to interview Robert Wagner, for instance, lucid dreaming expert. I've got pages of questions for Robert Wagner. And all I've got to do is send an email, I think, and say, would you come on the podcast, please? And even if he said no, it doesn't matter. I'd be like, well, I've done it now. So I know all I've got to do is send an email. But there's something stopping. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Very soon. I can feel it. But the thing I noticed was, just interviewing like my sister and that, it wasn't enough. Well, let's finish this, and then I'll pause the recording for a little bit, and then we'll go through all the previous 200 episodes.
And it was only last year, 2017, right at the end of last year, that I sort of returned to what I originally wanted to do, which was design my own characters. And with the characters, they're more free. Like, I got a character, little Sophie. She's very free and simple, I guess, which is completely different to the pencil drawing, so it's quite nice to do these two different things. But my heart always wanted to be creating my own characters, and it's nice to finally be doing that. So I guess that will play into the podcast as well. There may be episodes where I talk about like designing characters, or maybe walking through the process of turning gestures into characters and stuff. So that's basically who I am, or what I do. I've also been in a local art gallery and exhibition with pencil drawings. And again, I could talk about that on the show.
And what was funny about that was I'd set my vision, I'd like meditated on it, and I said, I'm gonna get my art in an art gallery. And within a year I had my art in an art gallery. And then it was funny, when I got my art in an art gallery, I realised it wasn't what I wanted. How weird's that? So that's like what happens as well. You sort of you think you want something, and when you get it, it's not what you wanted. So I think that was quite a good important moment though.
Because there are fears and stuff involved in that, but
Social
it's one of those
fears.
things. The more you do stuff like that, the more you realise that really it's not as hard as you thought it was going to be. And I think art is like that. It forces you out of your comfort zone, and then you realise that it wasn't as scary as you thought it was.
Yeah,
That's why I
an
like
illusion.
art. It's very powerful. So, if anything, it would be nice to talk about that as well, like just how art is good for you, really. So that's basically what the podcast is going to be about. I'm really looking forward to doing this. It's going to be something completely different to what I've done before. And again, there is a fear involved in this, because I've been wanting to do a podcast for years, and I've always put it off because I thought like my voice wouldn't be good enough. But at some point, like, I look at this podcast, the way I look at like doing sketching or something is, when you start doing a sketch, it might turn out rubbish. But if it does, you just turn the page and do another one. And the more you do those rubbish sketches, before you know it, you're actually doing some nice ones. that's basically it, really. It's just going to be a little podcast each week about things to do with art.
What's that noise?
And hopefully
like
everyone gets something out of it. Hopefully I can get something out of it, and hopefully you can too. And you can find out more about the podcast at sofreeart.com.
I actually stopped using that URL.
All the episodes and
sophielawson.com.
And you can find out more about me and my art at sophielawson.com. There's a contact form on there and stuff, so if you have anything you'd like to talk about on the show, feel free to send me a message and I will do my best.
I'll ignore it.
But until next time, this is Sophie Lawson saying bye-bye.
Hey, we did the echo. That's little music. I made this music myself. I make all the music on these podcasts. I've got this thing called Dance EJ on the
Can you hear that baby crying outside? Aww.
Baby!
Baby.
I remember that. In my old place I used to live, there was a baby. Somebody had a baby across the road, and you could always hear it crying. It's quite cool, isn't it? So, well, that's it for the episode 0. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through all of the previous episodes and just like quickly talk about the topics and things. Boing! Back again. So before we get into this next bit, I just wanted to say something. Somebody, I just went out because somebody bought some caps, and I put them up for 4. There were 4 caps, like baseball caps, and I put them up for £5. It was £5 for all of them, but it didn't say that. It said £5. So they came out and bought 3 of them, but I gave them all 4 of them, and they gave me £15. Yeah, because they thought it was £5 each. So at first, when I realised, I thought, me and my mum got extra £5 each year. But then what happened was, I felt bad about it. So I messaged them and said it was actually £5 for all of them. But what would you have done in that situation? And do you think there's anything wrong with that? Do you think there's anything wrong with that if... That's what I'm saying. Is it a bad thing or not? I don't think it is. I think the other person has made a mistake there. But the strange thing is I felt a bit bad about it. That's why I messaged them and said, you've actually given me £10 too much here. So, but what happened now is they've gone home. They're too far away now, I think. But what's strange is, isn't it strange how emotions... So I think emotions are quite strange. So what we're going to do now is, lilDENNiS, we're going to go through each of these episodes of the podcast, starting with episode 1, and I'm just going to briefly talk about them. I'm going to aim for like 30 seconds each. Well, I'm not going to plan for it, but I'm going to not go too long, hopefully. But this podcast is going to be a big one, I think. So the first episode was episode 0, which was an introduction. Little Derek the donkey, he's in the way a little bit. Actually, little Derek the donkey can have a little lie down. Episode 1, the first episode that we ever did, the first official one, it was called Best Drawing Techniques. I've just got to check something, make sure that you can see it on my camera. Yeah, I think you can. But episode 1 was best drawing paper. So what I did was I had a series of podcasts. I was going to do like 10 episodes of best paper, best erasers, best pens, best pencils, best whatever, paints or something. I was going to go through all the sort of artist things. Now what happened was, I posted the first episode and I had a lucid dream. A spontaneous lucid dream. And it was so, I would say, life-changing that I had to talk about it on the podcast. So my plans straight away went out the window. So instead of doing all the best art things, suddenly from the get-go, spiritual things come into the podcast. Now, what I did was I said lucid dreaming in art, because I'm still convinced that lucid dreaming is powerful for drawing or painting and for creativity. Because if you think about it, the dream realm, all the dream realm is like a big massive canvas. It's basically, lucid dreaming is like an interactive painting. It's cool. So episode 3 was called Best Drawing Pencils. And what I used to do back in the day was I had my little Sophie character. For the first 50 episodes, all the thumbnails, I would create little custom thumbnails. But that was one of the things that I had to drop and stop doing because it was taking a few hours to do it. So that's another thing. When you start out on these things, you've got all these big grand ideas. I wanted to have custom thumbnails with little Sophie. I wanted to have do editing and stuff. But what happens is, as you get into it, you realise if I'm going to keep doing this, I've got to actually sort of limit the things I'm doing, make it a bit easier. So that was one of the things that went. The next one, episode 4, was called Best Drawing Erasers, and I did a little drawing of my Tombow mono eraser, which I think is the best eraser in the world. Because the thing about that one is, well, it comes in this beautiful blue, black and white package. But the best thing about that is you can really be aggressive with the paper, and it never ruins the paper, and it's the best one at taking away the pencil marks. That mono eraser, and actually they use that in Japanese manga. That was the reason I got it in the first place, because I had a load of manga, how to draw manga books and stuff, and they kept having this little Tombow mono eraser in there. So the next one was called, episode 5 was Self-Doubt, It's All Mental. And I did a little drawing with the yin and yang sign. That yin and yang sign, I see it completely differently now. I see it as like a little creature, 2 little creatures. See, I always used to focus on the dots. So I would see it as like a white dot and a red dot inside of the circle. What happens now is I actually focus more on the shape of the thing that the dot is in, and it looks like, I guess you could call it like a little sperm. So you've got like a white sperm going one way and like a black sperm going the other way. You could look at that as like a positive spirit and a negative spirit together, which is all about entangled opposites, which the further I get into this, the further I go into like lucid dreaming and spiritual things, the more you realise what I think it's all about, balancing opposites. So for me, that symbol is probably one of the best ones. Episode 6 was called Self-Awareness and Art, and I did a little drawing of little Sophie holding a little Sophie. But the thing about that is, self-awareness. I think self-awareness is key to everything. It is. It's like change. Everything's about change. So if you've got self-awareness, you can. Well, I think if you want to change, if you like, for instance, interviewing guests on a podcast, you got to have the awareness of it. Yeah, that's. It's all about self-awareness. For me, self-awareness is key. Now, episode 7, spirituality, swimming and art. So on this one, I was talking about, because back then I was trying to learn how to swim, and I never actually, at the moment, I still haven't been able to swim, because I realised it was actually more of a mental thing. Learning to swim is more mental than actually physical. So you've got to learn how to do the moves, but I feel like you could perfect the moves, but if your mind's not in the right place, you ain't going to be able to do it. So I feel like, for me, I think the best way I'm going to learn how to swim is to be sort of pushed into the water and just be forced to start swimming or something. But this was quite funny. I think this was the one I talked about. What happened was, while I was in the changing rooms, because this was, again, I was facing the fear of being transgender in the female changing rooms. This was quite early on, as I was just starting to be Sophie, like full time. what happened was I was in the changing rooms getting changed, and this bloke pulled back the curtain while I was in there, which I thought that was quite funny. What's happening here? Episode 8, one of my favourite numbers, I called it Where Do Thoughts Come From? This is when I started to realise, because I was now doing quite a lot of, the more I do in this podcast and stuff, the more I was going quite mental. And I started to realise that the thoughts in my head, and I know that it's the thoughts in everyone's head, all the thoughts are not all your thoughts. Some of the thoughts in your head, they're actually not your thoughts. But again, going back to awareness, if you haven't got the awareness of this, you think those thoughts are your thoughts. So this is the thing, as soon as you start getting the awareness of what's going on, you can start sort of realising that thought is not your thought. Now, as I've got even further on, I'm starting to think what's actually happening is, it's almost as if we're walking around with thoughts coming out of us. Or it's almost as if the air is full of everybody's thoughts. So as you're walking through space, thoughts are sort of going into you. But the thing that's funny is they all sound like you. So all these thoughts sound like your voice in your head. But it's actually other people's thoughts. So I like that one. Episode 9, another one of my favourite numbers, it was called Finding Focus. And on this one, little Sophie had some glasses. This is something I'm still struggling with, actually. Focus. Yeah, focus is a hard one for me, because I sort of like, a bit like Homer Simpson with these donuts. He'll be eating a donut or something, he sees another one, it's like, ooh, another one. But it's quite hard, that. It's to do with, I think, discipline. It's also to do with knowing what you're actually aiming for. And I feel like at the moment, well, I do know what I'm aiming for. But I feel like you need to know what you're actually aiming for focus. That's what I think. But I feel like focus is probably one of the hardest things, because it's almost as if the world is set up to distract you. So it's almost like you're a little David and Goliath. You're like Goliath trying to go down this path or something, and you've got the giant, which is, well, everything else is like distracting. Something like that. Episode 10 was called Lucid Dreaming with little Sophie. Oh, this one, I still haven't done this. I almost did it. I want to go into a lucid dream and meet my character, little Sophie, and talk to her and stuff. I got very close. I saw her little hand. It was very emotional, that was. As I'm talking about this, I can actually still see it in my head. I know exactly where it was. It was in the kitchen, in the old place that I lived at. And little Sophie's hands are sort of like stumps. She's a very sort of simple character. And I saw her little stumps in the dream. But I would love to do that. Imagine if you could go into a dream and talk to your character. It's something that a lucid dreaming expert, Dr. Oh, what's she called? I've forgotten her name. Oh, that's a shame. But there's this lady, a lucid dreaming expert, Dr. something, and she actually talks to her characters. I think I talked about it on that episode. She talks. She's an author. She would talk to her characters in the dream, and then they would actually guide the story. How cool is that? Episode number 11 was called The Meditating Light Bulb. This was cool. I was meditating, and the light bulb come on. So that was quite weird, that. But that's the thing that happens. You start having these very strange experiences. Episode 12 was called Minimalism, which again is something I'm going through at the moment as well. Minimising, like simplifying everything. Because again, I think that's good for focus. Even just looking at because for the thumbnail for this one, it was all basically pink with the word minimalism in the middle. It's amazing how calming it is, all that space. Whereas when it's chaotic, when there's lots of things, it's like chaotic. You can still have focus, but minimalism is brilliant. I love that. Episode 13 was called Story Time, Little Sophie's Big Book of Nothingness. Yeah, I think on this one I read a story. I created this little story about I don't know, was it the little... No, it might have been. I think it was the little... I did a story about a boy who wanted to be a girl, something like that, and he ends up sort of time travelling. I think I read that story on that one. Episode 14 was called Tree Friend. So I've got this little tree friend at Saltram that I see a lot, but I haven't actually been there for probably 2 months, so I need to go back there, because I feel like the trees are alive. There's I had this strange experience once where I've experienced it looking at a photo as well. I took this photo out at Saltram, surrounded by trees and things, and I once looked at this photo and I could feel, I suppose, the spirits of the trees. It was, and I've had it when I'm actually out there in the trees. You feel, when somebody's looking at you. Well, imagine you're sitting there and all the trees around you, you can feel them looking at you. It was a little bit, I want to say, creepy. But that was so there's definitely something to these trees. I've noticed an error as well. I've actually, what I did was I did a load of foliage at the bottom of the thumbnail. I've actually put the foliage behind the line art of the tree. So there's a mistake there. Episode 15 was called Floating in a Float Tank. These are called sensory deprivation tanks as well. Strange these are. I don't know whether they're still allowing them at the minute with all the rules and things, but what you would do is you would lie in this pool of water which had loads of salt in it, so much salt in it, you floated, you could not sink. So you were floating in this water, and there's no sounds, there's no visuals, and what happens is at some point you sort of become the water, and strange things apparently happen. The only thing I felt during that was I felt myself spinning, like on the surface of the water, but when I thought about it, it was impossible. I felt myself spinning multiple times, which was impossible because the side of the tank was actually shorter than my length, so there's no way I could have actually spun around. So that was a weird thing. But the lady who run that tank, that like the lady who was in reception when I was talking to her, she said she was in there once and she felt the expansion feeling, which for me is the sacred sensation of like the God, the creator. It's this never-ending expansion feeling. So what I've noticed there is that feeling, that oneness, you can get it from many places. You can get it from lucid dreaming, Reiki healing, psychedelics, meditating, flotation, like sensory deprivation tanks. You can get it from Reiki healing, I got it in. You can get it, I reckon you could get it anywhere. The next one, episode 16, was called Imperfect Work, because that's one of the things the biggest thing I've learnt from this podcast, I think, has been accepting imperfections. Because like when I started it, like I said, I would spend hours trying to just create a little 20-minute episode, because what was happening was I was trying to remove all of my faults and all of the things that went wrong and stuff. And then I soon realised that the best thing to do is just to actually accept it, which that's the thing, it's about acceptance. And as soon as you accept imperfectness, what's cool is you become perfect. In a strange way, it's brilliant. Because you would think if I start accepting imperfect work, it's going to... I'll tell you something that's cool. I've just noticed the letter R and F. If you put the letter R and F together, it creates like a little house. The negative space. The negative space of the R and F, when they're put together, the inside of it is like a little house. How cool is that? Episode 17, I called it Sketching People in Public. This is brilliant. Going outside and sketching people. All about like capturing their essence and stuff. But the thing with that is, it's not just about the drawing. It's not just about like, the sketching. For me, that was a big thing about social anxiety. Because you're in public sketching. So I talked about things like that on that one. Episode 18 was called Abstract Painting. This was the first time I ever attempted abstract painting. And what I noticed was, very much like that thing where you can go into a lucid dream, talk to your character, and you can both create the story together. Well, when you're doing an abstract painting, what I noticed was it's like the painting had a vision of its own. So you started out thinking, I'm going to put some paint here, and you sort of think, well, I thought like, oh, I'm going to try and create, say, some sort of squiggles or something here, but the paint would have a mind of its own, and in the end, it's as if you and the paint are working together, which was cool. Episode 19 was called Social Anxiety and Fears, and on that one, I was just talking about social anxiety. So that's like a reoccurring theme that is across the podcast and everything. Social anxiety and fears. And I drew like negative and positives on that. Episode 20 was called Overwhelm. And we got a little Sophie drowning in her own faults. So again, overwhelm, I feel like that's the complete opposite of minimalism. It's amazing as well how if your space is full of stuff, it sort of gets in your head. Like your mind becomes overwhelmed as well. So that's cool. What I like about water is water is like peaceful. Bubbles, I like bubbles as well. Episode 21 was called Virtual Reality and Lucid Dreaming. So back then, I had a PlayStation VR, like the headset and stuff, and I went into it, and especially like a scary game, there was this game called Resident Evil 7, that was another one. You're actually walking around the environment and you could like tilt your head around the corners, but it really felt like you was in there. And I started noticing virtual reality is just like a lucid dream, whereby you're in the virtual reality, you know it's not real, but it sort of feels real. When you're in a lucid dream, you know you're dreaming, so you know it's not like this reality here, but it still feels real. So it messes with your head. And I noticed they were the same sort of thing, which makes me wonder whether we're inside of a virtual reality at the minute, but we don't realise. Episode 22 was called Sacrifice, Discipline and Finding Balance. So, again, balance, that's another one. Balance is another thing I feel like it's all about balance. Everything is. And then sacrifice, you've got to have sacrifice and discipline. It's all sort of the same thing, really. I feel like this all, like focus, discipline, sacrifice, minimalism, it's all sort of just trying to get to a place of peace. Episode 23 was called It's Book Time. I did a little review sort of type thing of the book Keys to Drawing with Imagination by Bert Dodgson. And Bert Dodgson has one of my favourite all-time art books called Keys to Drawing, which is a beautiful yellow book. It's the first book I ever started drawing from, and this one here is about imagination. But I still haven't really studied from that one. The next one was episode 24 called Copying Other Artists' Work. What I did on this one was I got the Mona Lisa and I sort of turned her into little Sophie. But this was all about like, well, I now know it as master studies, where you look at like other artists' work, and you're drawing it or painting it, copying it, but you're sort of doing it aware of, again, a lot of art is about awareness, because you're looking at a piece of artwork. If you're sort of aware of the lines, you can start trying to recreate that, and then that's going to come into your own artwork. So I would say art is a big thing about awareness as well. Episode 25 was called the A to Z of art, spontaneous A to Z of art. I want to do another one of those. What I did on that was I went through the entire alphabet, and I said A, abstract. So like the first word that came to mind to do with art for each letter. I wouldn't mind doing that again, and then comparing the old one with the new one, see if the same things comes up. I enjoyed that one. That was a fun episode. That's when I started to become spontaneous, because I realised that if I kept doing this podcast sort of like controlling it and being sort of trying to be a perfectionist, I was going to drive myself crazy. So I started forcing myself to be more spontaneous, which again I think is going to help with interviewing guests on the podcast, because there's going to be a balance there. You're going to have to plan questions, but you're going to have to be spontaneous, because you might say something, and the guest will say something which you think, and you sort of go off in another direction. So you might end up never actually getting to your questions, but it doesn't matter, because I think like spontaneity is brilliant. It's more exciting because you don't know where you're going, and I feel like sometimes you get to the best places there. Episode 26 was called Waking Up Early. So I actually went through a phase for a few months of getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do my drawing. I loved doing that, but what happened was when I got another job, and when I got another job, it all messed up my routines. But that, for me, that's quite. I might actually get back into doing that, because I've noticed the first couple of hours, you can get. I reckon you can get more done in 2 hours at the start of the day than say 4 hours later on. Because as the day goes on, I find it's more hard for me to focus. So I like to do things. The first things you do are going to be sort of more focused, I think. I did a little drawing of little Sophie in bed. This was cool. Episode 27, making art should be fun. Yeah, I've always said if you're not having fun, what's the point? That's one of the reasons why I sort of stopped doing my realistic drawings. I wasn't having as much fun with it. So I feel like you can use fun as like a sort of a radar. I feel like if you're having fun, you're doing the right thing. If you're not having fun, then I feel like you've got to actually change something. So, like the podcast. With the podcast, I felt that by being too structured, I wasn't having as much fun. So you've got to feel it out, really. But I think fun should always be. If I was to draw life, I would draw fun in the centre, in a bubble, and like everything else that you're doing, I think should be coming off of that. Episode 28 was called Sleep is Key, and again, I still believe this. I feel like sleep is actually probably the most important thing. It's like you're recharging your batteries. So if you've got like if the batteries run out, you can't use it. So sleep. Episode 29 was called Focusing on One Passion. And this is another thing, like focusing. So I got like do I focus on art? Do I focus on spirituality? Do I focus on transitioning? Do I focus on this, reading? All the rest of it. And then within each thing you've got, when you say I'm going to focus on art, do I focus on digital art? Do I focus on painting traditionally? Do I focus on pencil drawings? And then you go digital. Do I focus on studying from books? See what I mean? It's never ending. But I think you've got to do that. But the other thing is, with focusing, is I think I'm more and more becoming to the feeling that you actually have to have everything going at the same time, little bits of it. So like you've got your main focus, which might be, say, drawing, trying to become the best artist, but you've got to have like little other things as well, like playing, say, PlayStation. I put meditation I put as a high one, but you've got all these other things as well. So you've got to focus on one thing, but not forget the other things, which is hard. Episode 30 was called Why Do an Art Challenge? Little Sophie's got like a little boxing outfit on. So, well, that's brilliant. I ain't done an art challenge for a couple. I think the last one I did was 2020, when I did a 365-day drawing challenge, which was actually the hardest thing I've ever done with drawing. But I learnt so much from that. That's probably the main thing, is you're doing a drawing challenge. It's challenging, but rewarding. Episode 31 was called Lucid Dreamings and Gender. And on this one, little Sophie's covered in stubble. So this was just lucid dreams and gender. Well, there's loads of things with that. When you're dreaming, are you actually female or male? And then it brings in the question, is a spirit male or female? Which goes back to like God, the creator. If the creator, well, no matter what, the creator, is the creator an entity? If it is it male or female? Because the minute you have male, you've got to have female. Otherwise you can't have male. So then that means the creator, for me, can't be male or female. It has to be both. So I don't know how that works, but lucid dreaming, you sort of, well, Dan Harrison on the Ascend podcast, he once said he had a lucid dream where he became a female prostitute. So you can sort of see how in the dream realm, gender isn't like stable. Episode 32 was called Inktober. I was talking about Inktober, which I haven't done that one for about, well, the last one I did was 2019, I think, because I did it just before the 365-day drawing challenge. I loved doing that. I learned a lot doing that. Episode 33, out-of-body experiences. So I talked about out-of-body experiences, and I think I talked about a book on that one. Robert Monroe's Journeys Out of the Body. Brilliant book. There's another book by Anthony Peake, which is cool as well. But the thing with out-of-body is, I feel like when you get into lucid dreaming, you're going to end up having an out-of-body experience. I'm convinced of it. But the thing with that is, are they the same thing? And then again, spirits. If you're out of body, you must be some sort of spirit or something. So there's lots of there's lots of questions about that. If what is happening with out of bodies? Because you can go out of body. So that you've got what is happening there then? If we can go out of body, which we can, what does that mean? It means we're not our bodies. So there's lots of questions there. Also, what they talk about is out of body. They say when you go out of body, your astral body is connected to your physical body with like a silver cord. So I wonder whether that's some sort of chain. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? So your body is actually, I would say that silver cord is like a visual representation of entanglement. So like in the atoms or the quantum realm, you can have something happen here, and it affects something like millions of miles away, I would imagine they're actually connected by some sort of cord. Something like that. Episode 34 was called Pencils versus Ink, where I talked about, drawing with pencils versus inks. It's quite cool. I like that one. The thumbnail for that, I actually drew it with pencils, which was quite cool. Episode 35, are video games bad for you? That is a reoccurring question of my entire life, and it stems right back to my dad. Because in the 80s, and especially the 90s for some reason, the early 90s seemed to be worse than the late 80s for people saying that video games were bad for you. And I think it's because what happened was, during the 90s, video games started to look more realistic. So if you're playing something that's more realistic looking, and you're doing stuff like killing people, I think that, it was really like Grand Theft Auto. That was when it really kicked off. People started saying, they're bad for you. But my dad always used to say, video games are bad for you. And I think it's actually put some sort of psychological wound inside of me, which until this very day I still struggle with accepting video games in my life, even though I know they are good for you. But they're also not if you're not careful, because they can actually become like obsessive. Episode 36 was called Questions of Conflict. I don't know what that one was about, but the thing that springs to mind here is it sort of links back into like focus. You're trying to focus on something else, but there's something else you want to do as well. So you've got these two things you want to do, and you know that you can't do both of them. So I think conflict is the biggest thing about finding focus. It's what makes it so hard, is this feeling of conflict. Episode 37 was called Gesture Drawing, which is all just, for me, gesture drawing is the best part of art, because it's gesture drawing is like it's the bit where you're most free. You're just going for it, and it doesn't matter what it looks like. That's what's so cool. And then the further you get into the drawing process, the more it starts to stiffen up and stuff. So I love gesture drawing. Episode 38 was called Thank You Sausages. I can't remember what that was about, but there was something to do with sausages in this one. Sausages. And on that one I just drew a massive sausage. We like sausages. I like vegetarian sausages. Linda Lusardi's vegetarian sausages are nice. Episode 39 was called Social Media. And I haven't really been on social media for ages, like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I don't really go on those anymore. Even though I know it's probably something you should be doing, again, it goes back to fun. If I'm not having fun, I'm not going to do it. And I wasn't having fun with social media. I have fun with YouTube, because I think YouTube is quite creative. So that's why I still do the YouTube. Episode 40 was called Interpreting Dreams, and on this one I had a little Sophie guiding on the thumbnail. I had a big pencil, like a big hand, writing that. Little Sophie was guiding the hand, because what that's about is when you're interpreting dreams, you're writing about it. You can get to a place where you're writing things without realising you're writing it. So you can actually get to the bottom of your dreams by writing about them. So it's almost as if like your higher self starts writing through you. Episode 49 was called Podcasting, Goals and Loneliness. I've just noticed the microphone shaped a bit like an acorn. So podcasting, goals and loneliness. I don't know what that's about, but something with loneliness is there's a difference between loneliness and being alone. So I can't really remember what that one was about. Episode 40 was called Planning, and on that one I think I would have talked about how you can spend all day doing your plans and then something will happen and your plans are out the window. So you've got a plan to have a sort of a vision, but you've got to be spontaneous because who knows what's going to happen. But I do like planning. Episode 43 was called Lucid Dreaming Practice. I can't remember what that was about, but the thing with lucid dreaming is it is very much something you've got to sort of focus on. So this is the thing, I want to focus on my lucid dreaming. I want to focus on my art as well. So there's things that are going on, balancing. But yeah, definitely, if you're not focusing on lucid dreaming practice, you're not going to lucid dream. So, but again, the good thing about that is it shows you if you really want to have a lucid dream, all you've got to do is actually focus on practicing. It's quite cool. Episode 44, Lewis Hamilton's number, which 44 is like a sort of a power number for me now. My favourite driver, Lewis Hamilton, is number 44, and I just feel like there's like a positive energy to that number. But this episode was all about studying with SVS Learn, and I love SVS Learn. Lee White, Will Terry and Jake Parker, 3 artists, they come together and create, they've got a podcast called 3 Point Perspective. I love that they did that as well. 3 Point Perspective, like drawing is about perspective, 3 points, but there's 3 of artists, so you've got 3 points of perspective. It's cool. And what I like about them is they are very real. They're like that, they've got loads of knowledge, but they don't mind making mistakes. Which I find if you're studying and learning, if the person teaching is making mistakes and they're okay with it, it just makes you feel very relaxed because you know that you can make mistakes as well. Episode 45 was called Holotropic Breathwork. Now this was brilliant. I had this vision. Holotropic breathwork is you're going like that for an extended period of time, and what happens is all of a sudden, you can basically trigger out of body experiences and things. But I had this vision of like apes. It was as if I went back in time to the apes, and this being came down with a pyramid. These apes touched this pyramid and they received this massive download, which I feel like is almost as if that would be the moment of the Garden of Eden where Adam and Eve ate from the apple. I feel like that vision that I had it's almost like the same thing. That triangle was them getting the tree of knowledge. Episode 46 was It's a me, Mario. So little Sophie was dressed up as Mario, and I must have been talking about video games again. I think this might have been when I had a Wii U, because I found a Wii U for about 20 quid, I think it was. It had loads of games and things, and I got well into that, Super Mario. So that was cool. Do you know what? Super Mario isn't my favourite character to look at. I think he's a very boring character, but his games are amazing. Whereas like Sonic the Hedgehog is a brilliant character to look at, but his games aren't as sort of sophisticated, I suppose. So Super Mario's got a better game. Sonic's the better character. But I always thought what a boring character Super Mario was. Because he's just a fat bloke in like a little outfit. Episode 47 was called Is God Really the Devil? Now this one was triggered from a lucid dream. When I started, this one was quite hard to talk about because I felt like as I was talking, something in my head was saying you can't say that. you can't say that. You can't say that. But I feel like that was actually what I would consider to be I would say it's maybe either like the shadow self or some sort of negative spirit or something that was trying to stop me from saying it, because it knew that I had to say it. It knew that if I said this, I was gonna learn something. So I'm convinced that the God in the Bible is actually not the real God. It's like a sub-God. And I feel like the God that's actually the one in the Bible, at least in the New Testament, is actually negative. You see? But the thing with that, even now talking about it, it's there's blockages. But all I know is there's something to that, because it feels right when I say that. So episode 48 was called Automatic Drawing. This was actually a little drawing exercise I got from an artist I used to be in contact with from Australia. I wonder how she's doing. She actually got little Bobby here. Little Bobby. There's a puppet, one of my puppets called Bobby. But this automatic drawing, there's a thing called automatic writing where you just basically, while you're half asleep, you just write. And what happens is, again, you start sort of channeling spirits or something. The same can happen with drawing. I've got hiccups again. Hey, it's weird, isn't it? I've got to pay attention to this. I feel like I get hiccups on these podcasts when I'm talking about something important. So I was talking about spirits, channeling. But when you automatic drawing is, you get a piece of paper and you just basically scribble. You just see what happens. I like doing that. Episode 49 was called 48-hour fast. So I did 2 days without eating anything, and I'm actually due another one of these. I think I've done 3 of these so far. This was the first one, I think. I've done 3 of them, but I need to do another one soon, because very strange things happen. But it's always different. That's what's quite weird. Some people, when they do 48 days without eating, they will start to see things. I told my mum about this, and she said once she didn't have much money. She didn't have any money for food. This was only a couple of years ago. She didn't tell me either until recently. She had no money for food, so she couldn't eat nothing. And I think she said it was 5 days, and she actually started to hallucinate. So again, you sort of makes you wonder, what is happening here? What is happening? Why is it that if we don't eat something, we start hallucinating? Also, what is it? What is causing that hallucination? And also, what is the hallucination? Is it possible somehow you're seeing what's really there, but normally you don't see it? See, an hallucination might be that you're seeing the truth. Hey, look, episode 50. I'm going to do... Episode 50 was the first celebration, and this one, it was called Time for Change. So this was the first ever video podcast. And I remember back then, I was absolutely terrified. There was Easter eggs in the background. The thumbnail was actually me. A picture of me in my old flat. And there's Easter eggs in the background. So this must have been around Easter time. And this was when I first started to do, what's it called? Video podcasts. And, well, it's amazing how much more at peace you get with yourself when you start doing videos. It's a bit weird, that. But the other thing is, you never, at least I haven't, truly get... Basically, when you're putting yourself on a video, it's completely different to putting yourself on a microphone, because nobody can see you. Yeah. And even now, I still feel like I'm getting judged by being on the video. So, but I feel like that if you've got an issue with your appearance or something, I know this is going to sound weird. I think the best thing you could ever do is start doing videos, because you've got to face it. It's quite funny. Episode 51 was called "Stuff Takes Longer Than You Think." Well, this goes on for everything. There's actually a thing called Hopkinson's law or something, and it's that if you think everything takes, I think he said, 3 times longer than you think. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, like for me, transitioning from Kevin to Sophie, you think that's going to take, say, a year, it will actually take 4 years. So that's another thing. That's something I think you've got to always keep in mind, because like the website, for instance, I thought it would take about 6 months. When it got to about a year and a half, I just thought, I can't be doing this anymore. See, but if I had thought, hang on, it's going to take 3 times longer than that, I would have been prepared for it. So I feel like that's actually a very important thing to remember. Because like, you can spend all day planning something, it's still going to take it's still going to take like 3 times longer than you think. It's mad. Episode 52 was called "Iterating in Public," which is actually something that Sean McCabe said on the Sean West podcast. The podcast. But what that is basically just do it. So, like me with the videos, I wanted to do video podcast, so I just did it. Even though I feel like I wasn't ready for it, I just did it, and I iterated in public. So I started out with the basic webcam on my Surface Pro, and then you gradually build up. Like, it's weird. The more you do something, you just get better at it. Episode 53 was called SBS Learn Study Notes. And this was all about creative composition. So what I did on these was, I basically went through my study notes and just talked about it. I love doing those. I ain't done one of those for ages, because I haven't done any studying for ages. Although these have sort of turned into the articles, where I go through like an article and in an art magazine, and that was basically the same thing, but on a smaller scale. Oh, I can see in the background of that thumbnail, I can see my little cooker. I used to have a little mini cooker in my room. Oh. Episode 54 was called "Family's Reaction to Me Being Transgender." When I just talked about, well, my family's reaction to me being transgender. Doing episode, and the thing about that is, you had all sorts of different scales. You had people fully accepting, people fully sort of disowning me. So that's cool, though, isn't it? You get to experience all sides of it. It is cool, even though it's like negative. It's cool. Episode 55 was called "The Struggles of Trying to Focus and Curate an Instagram Feed." The way I resolved that was to just not bother doing it, which I think is probably a negative, because I do think there is a lot of power in having an Instagram. But the thing for me was I could not find a balance between my art, spiritual things, transitioning, like my photos. I wanted it all together, and it was too hard to put that together. And also, I've always found like doing an Instagram or something too time consuming. So that's talked about stuff like that on that. Episode 56, we got lilDENNiS on here. lilDENNiS, yeah. So, this was cool. Insecurities and self-acceptance. What's happened here? I was actually going through a phase of, I had a little pink handbag, I would pull topics out. So I would go into an episode not knowing what I was going to talk about. I loved those ones. So this one was all about insecurities, things like that. Episode 57, this must have been around about the time when lilDENNiS came on the scene, little co-host. And this one was called "You Don't Need Social Media." Yeah, I heard somebody, there was an interview with somebody, really successful, like creative, and they actually turned around and they said they were an author. They had all these books and things, like loads of, they sold loads of books, but they didn't have any social media accounts. And I thought, well, you know, everyone says you need to have a social media account, but he didn't. So I was just thinking, you know, do you actually need to have these things? Episode 58 was called Sacrifice, talking about a book called The War of Art. I can't remember what that was about, but what's the next one? 59, Dealing with Mental Issues. Well, that could be anything. That's basically it. I think it is all mental. Somehow I feel like we are inside of ourselves, and the whole for me, reality is mental. So that's why everything is all about mental. That's our episode 60. Why do haters hate? lilDENNiS was asleep on this one, and well, this one was all about haters. I must have received some hate messages or something. I don't know what that is. Episodes, well, I feel like haters are good though, because in a weird way, it's a positive, isn't it? But what I would say about that now is, what I've learned is, haters are getting triggered by something, which means it's an unresolved issue that they've got, which they're projecting onto you. So I would just say, what I would take from that is not personal. Yeah, haters are not personal. It's just almost like a pre-programmed response. Episode 61 was called Art Challenges, talking about painting and things. That was cool. Episode 62, The Power of Affirmations. What this is you basically, in the morning and at night time, you repeat something like, well, my favourite is I am sexy as fuck. You repeat that, you keep saying it, you'll believe it, even though when you first start doing it you think no. And even like if somebody says it, you think that ain't gonna work, but it does. I don't know why. Episode 63 was called From Arsonist to Artist. It was all about change, and because I used to be an arsonist, I used to love setting fire to things back in the old days, and I still like the smell of like burning things. Episode 64 was called Psychedelics, Mushrooms versus Technology, because I am more convinced now than ever that what's happened is this Earth existed, and I would say like a comet fell out of the sky with sort of like mushroom seeds on it, and it populated the Earth with mushrooms, and I think the mushrooms evolved into humans. So I think we're actually descendants from mushrooms. And then what's also happened is I think a spaceship crashed on the Earth. I don't know when, and definitely Roswell, but I think I think it seeded the planet with microchips. So that's the two ends of it. You've got like the mushrooms, which is an organic seed, and a microchip, which is like a technological seed. And I think they're both trying to take over the Earth. So you've got like the organic versus the technological thing. And then the Earth is just like in the centre. Episode 65 was called Nature. And on this one, lilDENNiS went outside. He's actually sitting with my tree friend on the thumbnail. And this one was all about finding balance and facing fears. And the thing with that is, nature is for me the best way to sort of find balance. And I think with nature, it's a beautiful way to face your fears as well. Like, or at least sort of think about them. Because you're in such a peaceful environment, you can bring up these fears without distractions. So that's cool. Episode 66 was called Cats of June. What I learned from this 30-day art challenge. And, well, lilDENNiS has got a little pebble call, and it says, "You are enough." Which I think that's the thing about art challenges as well. Like when you're doing an art challenge, you're normally doing something that you're not really confident with. So you sort of have to accept. You have to accept yourself as well, a lot with art, which is cool. But Cats of June was this little challenge. Every June, you have to do 30 drawings for the month of June of little cats. Brilliant. I love drawing animals. Episode 67 was called Lucid Dreaming, and I was talking about some of my recent lucid dream experiences, and this become like a reoccurring thing. Every sort of month or so, I would talk about my lucid dreams. I haven't done that for a while. I haven't had what was a recent lucid dream? I remember. Well, I think I talked about this. The recent one, my brain is as if my head opened like an egg, and I felt myself going out the top of my head. My lucid dreams at the moment are very sort of little, I suppose. I haven't had any sort of epic lucid dreams like I used to have, but I think it goes back to not getting as much sleep. At the moment, I'm about 9 hours sleep a night, but I think for me, 10 to 12 hours is the secret for lucid dreaming. But again, it's about balancing. Episode 68 was called Death. I said, I'm thinking about death. Hey look, I've put that wrong. I said, thinking about death can make you a better artist. So I've done that wrong. It should have said, how thinking about art can make you a better artist. The thing with death is, I think when you're thinking about death, it puts everything into perspective. So if you've got fears, you become sort of fearless. I think more people should look into death, because you think it's going to be negative, but it's the most positive thing to think about, I think. Episode 69 was called Studying Creatures. Studying little creatures. The first thing that pops in my head there is, this time when I was at Saltram, I was lying, it was the middle of the summer, beautiful hot, I was like sunbathing, and there was loads of grass in front of me, and I saw this some sort of little creature crawling up the grass, and it would go up the grass, down the grass, up the next blade of grass, down the next one, and I just thought, that's his life. His life is like walking around here, and you just sort of think, what are they doing? But then imagine that somebody might be up there looking at us, seeing us go about our life. You think about it. In the morning we wake up, we go to the work, we come home, we go back to the work the next day. If you zoom out far enough, we're going to look like a little creature like that. And they might think, what the hell are they doing down there? I'm sure this whole thing is like fractal. So it's the same thing happening on, like, up there and down here. Episode 70 was called Connecting the Dots, a new direction for the show. Now, the thing that springs to mind here is connecting the dots. Yeah, the more you start like looking into the ancient past, spiritual things and all the rest of it, you start realising it's all connected. So it's like that. Hey, it is really. You know those drawings you used to do as a kid, like connect the dots? You had a number 1, 2, 3, and you drew a little line through each dot, and then when you finished it, you looked at it and it was like a cat or something. You had just drawn a cat. I think that's what's happening here. Yeah, everything looks like it's separate, but it's actually all connected. Episode 71 was called Illness. I said, even monks get ill. So I don't know what that's about. Even monks get ill. I don't know. But, well, illness, part of life, I suppose. Episode 72 was called, it was a book review, Lucid Dreaming, Gateway to the Inner Self by Robert Wagner. That's in my bed at the minute, because I'm still reading that book. I love that book. It's a very deep book. If you want a lucid dreaming book where you can sort of discover some of the sort of things you can get up to, I recommend that one. Lucid Dreaming, Gateway to the Inner Self by Robert Wagner. It's got a beautiful cover as well, all like colourful and stuff. Episode 73 was called Addiction, because what I noticed is addiction is way more complicated than it first seems. Because, like, for instance, with video games, it looks like the addiction is on the surface is video games. You start digging deeper, it's like I said, it's a psychological thing. So addiction is way more complicated than it first appears. And I would almost say it's like layers of an onion. Like you uncover one bit and it leads to another bit. Episode 74 was called Lucid Dreaming. Some of my recent lucid dreaming experiences, part 2. And I must have been out in the sun at this point, because it looks like I got a tan in the thumbnail. And, well, I was drinking my hot chocolate as well. I don't drink hot chocolate much anymore. I miss that. See, that's another thing. Is it alright to drink hot chocolate? See, I don't know. Little things like that is worth questioning, I think. lilDENNiS and Peter the Penguin are on that one, though. So, Kitty wasn't here then. Yeah, lilDENNiS, he was, he must have been gay back then, because little Kitty wasn't here. So him and Peter were getting it on, I think. Episode 75, this is when I changed the style of the thumbnails. So this was a book review of the book Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. 76 was all about Show Your Work by Austin Kleon. And 77 was about Keep Going. So I did a 3-week special of Austin Kleon's books, which are brilliant. What I love about these books is they're little books. They're very little books. You get through them in an hour probably. But like each page is compressed to perfection. So you've got all this, like, loads of information jam-packed in this little book. What's good about these is you could turn to any one page and you would learn something. So I love that. Episode 78 was called Meditation Experiences 1. So I was just talking about some of my meditation experiences. I had one the other day. What was it the other day? I had an amazing one the other day. I've wrote it down, because that's the thing. I wrote all these things down because it's amazing how you can actually forget things like that. Episode 79 was called Me Little Website. It went kaboom. So this is when my website broke. And what happened was I had to restart doing it all, and I still haven't finished that. So that's like 120 weeks ago. What's that, 2 years or something? But the thing with websites is they're fun, but they take a lot of time. So, episode 80, the challenges of art challenges. You see what I did there? But that's it. I think the challenge is part of the fun of it. Episode 81, capturing the essence of a character with Simone Greenewald. And this was a Character Design Quarterly magazine article. I love doing these. What I do is I go through an article in an art magazine, and I go through it just talking about things. This was brilliant. What she did was she took a photograph and she turned it into a character. Brilliant. Episode 82 was called How Important is Having a Willy or a Fanny? Because I'm transgender. What happened was I could have had a operation to chop the old sausage off, but what happened was I couldn't decide what to do, and only last week I cancelled the thing. They rang up and I said, I've actually left the gender clinic, no longer seen the therapist, and I've decided to, well, for the moment, keep the willy, I suppose. But I just think it doesn't matter. I don't think it matters whether you've got a willy or a fanny. What's the difference? Episode 83 was a Character Design Quarterly magazine article, and this was called Characterful Creatures with Hayley Justice. And we've got, on the thumbnail, we had a little, what are they called? I think it's a rhino or something. But yeah, she's cool. Characterful Creatures. I think that's my best combination. Little creatures full of character. It's why I like the puppets and stuff. Episode 84, setting fire to my 20,000 gesture drawings. Am I glad I did that? I do miss them, so I had a cupboard full of gesture drawings, pages and pages of gesture drawings, and I actually set a fire to them. Well, I didn't. I tried to set a fire to them in the garden, but as you'll see if you watch that episode, it didn't work very well. So I ended up throwing them in the green wheelie bin, recycling bin, probably about 3 or 4 foot, and the whole thing was full of these gesture drawings. That's how many there was. But that was like a form of letting go. And I thought if I set a fire to them, because I was struggling to let them go really, but I had to because they'd taken up too much space. And I thought if I set a fire to them, it's a bit like a sort of a ritual. That was cool though. Episode 85 was the Art Sound Off Art Challenge, which is an art journaling micro podcast challenge by the boys over at Lean Into Art, but they've actually stopped doing their podcast. I used to love that one. That was a very sort of thought-provoking art podcast, but they stopped doing it for the moment. They took I think they called it a hiatus. That's probably about a year ago. So I don't know whether they'll ever come back. Funnily enough, I actually looked on YouTube last night for those two, and they're still making, well, Rob Stensinger didn't have any new videos, but Jersey Droves is still making videos. He's doing like live streams of these little characters and stuff. Episode 86 was called Lucid Dreaming, My Recent Experiences Part 3. Episode 87 was Social Anxiety and Video Game Addiction. And on that one we had a PS4 controller on the thing. But, well, again, it's a reoccurring issue in my life. Video game addiction and social anxiety. I would say those two there are linked to my shadow self. Definitely. Yeah. Social anxiety and video game addiction, which I would also put as buying. So like an addiction to buying things. Because like it could be art books or something. I've actually bought a couple new art books yesterday. They were only like £3 each. But so that's my shadow self, I think. Episode 88 was called Studying and Finding Focus and Balance Thanks to Video Games. So this is when what happened was I got video games. I was doing video games Saturday night, and it was actually really cool. It was a beautiful little thing where during the week it was all art, and then Saturday was like a little treat of playing video games. I think that is the perfect sweet spot, but the problem is, well, what happened was I started letting it slip into the week, and then before you know it, they're taking over again. So it's hard. That one is discipline, I suppose. Episode 89 was a Graphite magazine article, and I've actually spelt the word magazine wrong there. But it was an ethereal portraits with Sarah Tepes, and this was a nice one. She was doing she drew like a fairy portrait from her imagination. That's cool. Episode 90 was a Christmas sing-song with lilDENNiS, Clive, Peter the Penguin and Monty, and they're all here with us today on the podcast. Also, the thumbnail had a little Kebby the cat, little Sophie and Kebby the cat. I think I was singing Do They Know It's Christmas Time on that one. This was cool. Episode 91, Lucid Dreaming, My Recent Experiences number 4. So like I just keep talking about lucid dreams on those. Episode 92 was called Drawing Every Day, 90 Days. Oh, this was the Drawing Every Day for a Year challenge. So I was talking about day 90, and I was just talking about the things I'd learnt, struggles and all the things like that. Episode 93, an addiction to buying things. A therapy session this was. So what was happening was, I thought I was addicted to playing video games, and when I sort of started paying attention to what was happening, I realised it was actually an addiction to buying video games. So again, it's still the same though. I've got to improve that. The little thing, the best thing I've learnt is, it's like nip it in the bud. So instead of getting to the point where you've got to make a decision about buying a game or not, all you've got to do is stop yourself looking at the game. Because it's that thing, if no one sees, no one knows. If you don't know there's a game going for sale, you can't be tempted to buy it. As soon as you look at it, you've increased the probability that you're going to buy it. So it's quite hard though, because the thoughts, at least in my head, the thoughts really make me think that I've got to look at it. Again, it's a shadow self. It's something to do with my shadow, that is. Episode 94 was a theory. Are we all existing in our own universe? I still believe this, and the more I sort of uncover things, the more I'm convinced it's actually what's happening. And what it is to do with everyone else is like a probability-based being, like an NPC in a video game. And then you are the only conscious entity in the universe. But what it is, it doesn't mean that the other people aren't real. It's almost like we're all in our own self-contained universe. So, for instance, your sister has her own universe, and I have my own universe. But she's in my universe as like an NPC. But the things she's doing in her universe are changing what the NPC does in my universe, and vice versa. So I'm convinced of that. And that would be very easy to understand as like a video game. We can all play, say, Final Fantasy as a different character, but we're all playing a separate game. So if I wanted to turn the game off, I can. It's not going to affect somebody else who's playing Final Fantasy, you see? But if it's an MMO, you sort of you're interacting with each other, but you're still in separate universes. Now, this is a way that you could end up with half of the population like evolving, and half of them not evolving. Basically, like half of them could ascend, if you want to call it. Because all that would happen is the half that were ascending, their universes would get like switched off, or like their versions of Earth, and it's not going to affect the other people in their own universes. Episode 95 was a mystery topic. I can't remember what it was, but what I did was on that, I pulled a topic out of the hat, and I'll talk about it, and I would normally in the thumbnail or in the title, I would explain what the topic was. On this one, I thought I'm going to keep this a mystery because I thought it'd be cool. Because then, even you listening to it, you're not going to know what you're getting. Which I think there's a bit of curiosity is cool. There's something cool about curiosity, I think. And when you put the title in the description, it spoils it a bit. Because you go if it says video game addiction, you go into it knowing what you're going to get. Whereas if it just says like, who knows what this is, you're going into it a bit excited. You could also be disappointed though, that's the thing. So it's a bit 50-50 doing that. But episode 96 was called Saying No. Just say no. How important is that now, to say no, with all the things going on in the world? Again, it goes back, see, this is a thing. Yeah, we're all in our own universe. Saying no, it's only going to be affecting your universe. No's powerful though. Episode 8, look, no. No, as in yes and no. No as in no. To know something. Isn't it weird that those two words are the same? like no, for some reason for me, it has a, like, yes and no. The no of that, the yes and no carries like a negative vibe with it. It's almost as if saying no is negative, even though it's not. Whereas to know something, for me, is like positive. And that goes even back into like the Garden of Eden. They ate from the tree of knowledge, so they knew. Which for me, that's a positive thing, but they got punished for it. It goes back to why I think that God in the Bible is the devil. Why would you get punished for knowing? For me, the Creator would want you to know. Episode 97 was called What's on My Bookshelf, and this was part 1, which was mostly spiritual books, and episode 98 was What's on My Bookshelf part 2, which was mostly art books. And I remember what I did on these was I went through my bookshelf, pulling off the books and just reading the titles and saying if I had read it I'd talk about it, if I hadn't I'd say where I got it. So I just went through all my books like that. Episode 99 was called Negative Thoughts. I don't know what I was talking about, but for me that's like getting on top of the negative thoughts is key. I was listening to a podcast yesterday and they said a lot of people are trying to make people get rid of their negative thoughts, but that's not the key. The key is to, well, it goes Muji, the spiritual master Muji. He's got a beautiful way of looking at thoughts as like clouds. So what he says is, you're never going to get rid of the negative thoughts, but you can have them just, you are the sky, the negative thoughts can just like float along like clouds passing. So that's the thing, it's not trying to get rid of them, it's just allowing them to float along. Because what happens is if you attach to them, all of a sudden you get into the cloud and it gets like that. What was this? Episode 100. Episode 100 was a chat with Lorna Lawson. Sausages or fish cakes? No, sausages or fish fingers. So this was, what happened was, in about episode 50, I had made myself a promise that for episode 100 I would interview guests on the podcast. So my loophole, the way I got around that was actually to interview my sister. So I sort of did do it, but I sort of didn't. But again, at least I sort of tried. So episode 101 was a quick guide to composing characters with Katerina Obrowska, which was a character design quarterly article, and she created this cool character, like what they call, I think it's an anteater, like an anteater character. So that was when I go through like one of the articles. Episode 102 was called Starving Your Distractions. I don't know what that was about. Starving your distractions. It's quite, the thing that pops to mind for me is YouTube, like watching YouTube videos. That is my biggest distraction, I think. Yeah, that's what pops to mind there. Episode 103 was the wake up call. Now I don't know if this was the bit when the virus started to come out. I think it was, but as soon as that started happening, like the this virus thing, like all, you know, the first thing that popped in my head was, this is a wake-up call for humanity. So that's what I was talking about in that. Episode 104, Lucid Dreaming, My Recent Experiences Part 5. Talking about like lucid dreams. Episode 105 was called Colour Therapy. Oh, this is a bit embarrassing. So, episode 105, I said I was going to create this colour chart thing. What it was going to be like a page of all the colours with like the therapy. Like the, because basically each colour evokes feelings and things. So it's like a psychological way of looking at colours. And what I did was I did all the research, I got it all together, and on the podcast I was talking about it, and I said I'll include a PDF file for it, and I still haven't done it. I've started doing it. I've got it all laid out. I just didn't finish it. Quite annoying, but that's cool. Looking into colours and how they evoke emotions and things. It's quite. I never realised it was that was happening. It's quite good. I like that. Episode 106 was The Language of Shapes with Tom Hannay. What a cool name he is. His name is brilliant. If you see his name written, his name looks like a work of art because it's a Hanni, but his A has got 2 little dots above it, and it makes it look like the name is actually a character. And on this one, he drew a little dinosaur, things like that. There's another one of those article things. I love that. Episode 107, video game addiction. So this time, the last time we had one PlayStation 4 controller in the thumbnail. Now we've got 6 of them. So 6 is like a negative out of balance number. And also, when you see 6 of them, it's a bit more like oppressive, I suppose. So, but again, this is something I'm still processing. Episode 108, False Awakenings and Lucid Dreaming. So I was talking about false awakenings, which is where what happens is you wake up, you think you're awake, but you realise you're still dreaming. They are very trippy. They are. The Matrix 4. There's a moment in that which is actually for me, it's a false awakening. He has a false awakening, I think, in the Matrix 4, the Matrix Resurrections. Well, that was my interpretation of. 108 is also the number of Lost. The TV show Lost. 108 was one of the numbers. Episode 109 was website, and it was like I did a little development diary of the website. So I think it was 3 or 4 weeks. I was like focusing on the website, and I was talking about it, talking about the process of creating a website on the thing. So episode 109, episode 110 was website development diary week 1. Episode 111 was week 2, and the thumbnail had a little duck on it because me and my mum went down to Plimbridge Woods, and there was these little ducks there. One of them was beautiful. The colours of it, again, it looks like a little painting or something. It's a work of art. That animal, little duck. 111. I like that number. Episode 112 was website development week 3. Again, getting out in nature, because that was the big thing. You're doing all this time in front of the computer, working on a website. I had to balance it out with being in nature. So I actually recorded the videos in nature. So this one we had a tree, which looked like, my mum said it looked like a bloke upside down, with his legs sticking out the tree, which was quite funny. Episode 113 was the little angels and demons in my head. So you know that thing where they have like an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other? I'm actually convinced that's real, but I think they're spirits, and I think it goes back into that yin and yang sign. You've got these two opposites vying for sort of supremacy, I suppose. And so you've got the positive trying to influence you, the negative trying to influence you. The key is to have both of them singing the same song, I suppose. Episode 114 was called Designing a Cover with Sarah Conradson. This is another character design quarterly magazine. She creates this really beautiful, I would say it's a relationship really, between a little girl and a white tiger. But there's like a connection between these two characters. I love that. Episode 115 was The Nature of Fairy Art with Mark Potts, which was an ImagineFX article. So this was what I started realising was fairies are not all positive. Yeah, because like until that point I'd always thought fairies were these little beautiful things like Tinkerbell from Peter Pan. But when you start looking into fairies, you realise a lot of fairies are actually negative. But then you realise that the fairies are just like humans. You've got negative humans and positive humans. You've got that in the fairy realm as well. So I've got to remember that as well, because these reptilians, which everyone says is negative, there has to be positive reptilians. So it's not fair, I don't think, to just say everything is one or the other. Episode 116 was acceptance, and I put the process or fact of being received as adequate, valid or suitable. So that's what the word acceptance means. The process or fact of being received as adequate, valid or suitable. Episode 117 was Lucid Dreaming, My Recent Experiences Part 6. So that was going on for quite a while. Episode 118, Creating Creatures with Bryn Matheny. This artist here has got an art book. I want to get it, but it's a little bit too expensive at the minute. But for me, this artist, Bryn Matheny, is one of the best at creating really believable looking creatures from their imagination. It's brilliant. Can you hear my belly? I want to eat this cake. Episode 119, 4-word characterisation with Dung Ho. What a lovely little character they created. They created a little girl holding a pig. Really cool. So again, I love doing these articles because, well, here we go. Episode 120, face masks and freedom. So lilDENNiS, he was wearing a face mask. And this was 80 episodes ago. This was when I started to realise that there was something a bit fishy going on here with this virus thing. And I still believe that the face mask is nothing but a sort of a visual representation of suppression. So I did a series of these as well. Again, I need to do another one of these. Episode 121, an About the Tings episode about life and death, or death and life. And what this one is again, I just feel that it's really powerful to think about life, death. And life, but definitely death. I think if you think about death, you have a much better understanding of life, because they're related to each other. Episode 122 was an interview with makeup artist Jasmine Taylor. That was cool. That was my niece. So I loved doing that one. We had a lot of fun with that one. Yeah, it's cool, isn't it? She's getting a lot more successful now as well. She's in a little shop and everything. So cool for little Jazz, makeup artist. Episode 123, playing with colour. Oh, there is something about that though. Episode 122, the interview I did with Jasmine Taylor. At the start, I was very nervous, and she said so. I don't think I put this in the podcast, but she said, she was joking. She went, you're making me nervous. And that's it. I realised then, if you're nervous, the other person is feeling it. See, so it's weird. There's some sort of hidden language going on between us. So again, you've got to be very mindful of your. Well, if you're mindful of your thoughts, it all goes back to the thoughts, because it's all mental. Episode 123, playing with colour with Jerome Vogel. This artist has got very strange characters, which super weird proportions, but the use of colour is beautiful. So that was another one talking about that. Episode 124, designing for children's books with Julie Christians, which was another Character Design Quarterly magazine article. The thing that strikes me is fun. So children's books, they want fun, which I think is going back to that thing. Like, we are really children. So I think a lot of people are missing fun in their life. That's probably one of the biggest things, I think. So be like a child. That's the secret. Episode 125 was called Routine and Spontaneity. It was a brain dump episode. So again, it's this opposite thing going on here. So you got routine, structure, spontaneity, which is like chaos. You got to have both of them. Again, you got to balance the opposites of that. So talking about things like that. Episode 126 was Face Masks and Freedom Part 2. And again, this is like a little, what do you call it? Every month or so, every 2 months or something. I was talking about it because it was the situation was developing, but yet it still kept feeling the same. That something fishy going on here. Episode 127 was all about plagiarism, which was inspired by Jake Parker and Alfonso Dunn, because they started saying that Jake Parker had plagiarised Alfonso Dunn's book, but I just didn't think he had. So I was talking about that on that one. Episode 128, video game favourites with Lara Croft. Now this is cool. I actually cosplayed. I dressed up as Lara Croft on this one. So I cosplayed as Lara Croft, and I was talking about like some of my favourite video game things. That was fun. That I've got loads of images of me outside dressed up as Lara Croft, which I need to edit for the website. Episode 129, sketches versus finished drawings. Again, what I'm noticing is a lot of my topics are about opposites. Because like drawing, you've got the sketching, very loose and like free. You've got the finished drawing, which is way more structured. But they're both part of the same thing. Episode 130 was called Entities in Dreams. And About the Tings episode, I was talking about... I'm still trying to work this out. Entities and dreams. Are they separate from us? Or are they part of us? Like, are they from our imagination? Have we just made them up? Or do they have a separate consciousness? And then also, what are they? And I think they're linked in with the spirit realm, psychedelics. It's all the same thing. And there's these entities inside, even UFOs and aliens. Like, these entities are, I think they're very important to understanding like our existence. But the thing here is, the word entities has the word tit in it. Episode 131 was called A Sketch Everyday Article. Did you hear that? I burped as I spoke. This was called All in the Eyes with Simone Greenewald. And Simone Greenewald is one of my favourite artists. I've got one of her books. It's brilliant, but I love her. She's got a beautiful, fun style about her. Episode 132 was called 366 Days of Drawing. The Draw Every Day for a Year Art Challenge. I think this must have been when I finished it. And I spoke about all the things I learned and struggles and everything. It's very telling though that I haven't done an art challenge since then. I don't know whether I bit off more than I could chew with that or something. Look, and the next one after that was burnout. So what happened was I definitely crashed after that art challenge, because I for a whole year I'd every day been showing up to do this drawing a day challenge, and then suddenly I stopped doing it, and I sort of crashed. So I was talking about addiction and the positives and negatives of video games. So once again, video games is coming up, and burnout. That's another sort of see, burnout is the body's way of saying you're out of balance. Here, look at this. Well, episode 134, Face Masks and Freedom Part 3. This was actually with Spider-Man. So I dressed up as Spider-Man on this one, which was quite funny. And what my goal was, I was going to go out dressed as Spider-Man.
but I never quite. I got so close to doing it, but I didn't quite have the courage to do it. But I still got the outfit, so hey, actually, Spider-Man might come back. Yeah, I might bring Spider-Man back. Maybe, yeah, I'm going to do that. Episode 134, Face Masks and Freedom Part 3. Well, no, that was the last one. Episode 135 was called Scary Stuff. So I was talking about scary films, scary video games, and scary art. I like that. And the thing that springs to mind is, there's something fun about being scared, even though it shouldn't be. But the best thing is scaring someone else. So, like, if my mum's on the sofa, you can sort of creep behind the sofa and walk, and then you go boo, and she gets scared. And there's a sort of fun to that. So if I was a ghost, I could totally see how it would be fun to go around scaring humans. And you're not doing it to be horrible, you're just having a bit of fun. So, episode 136 was called 11 Years. This was a mystery topic one. And the thing with that is, 11 years is like a, same as like Lewis Hamilton's number 44, which is like a symbol of power. 11 years is like a symbol of, I was going to say hope. But basically what it is my gender therapist, my original gender therapist, who I really connected with, she said it took her 11 years to overcome her like difficulties in life. So what happened was, I was going through quite a suicidal period in my life, and she said that it took me 11 years to, and I just realised, yeah, this is not a overnight process, transitioning. It's a long process. So that, like, if I see the word 11 years, it gives me like, yeah, it puts things instantly into perspective. Episode 137, we are here to save the Earth. I'm convinced of that. I think the Earth is in some sort of, I was going to say like prison. I don't know if it's a prison or if it's just fallen too much into a negative. And I think our goal here on Earth, our purpose is to save the Earth. And we do that by saving ourselves, because we're linked. Because again, it goes into this thing of we're all in our own universe. So if we save ourselves, we save the universe. Episode 188 was Art Sound Off. This was the second year of doing it. My second year. And it was quite cool that, because I compared the first year with the second year, and it was different. You were doing the same art challenge, but it was different. It's the same with Inktober and that. I've done Inktober 3 times so far, and each year I've done it, it's been different. So even though you're doing the same art challenge, you're getting different things out of it, which is why it's cool. Episode 139 was called Talking to Strangers. So what I did on this was I went outside and I tried to talk to a random stranger. Now what's funny is I actually managed to do it. And this bloke that I spoke to, I see him quite a lot now. So he's always like, I feel like he's a very sort of introspective person. I would say he's a bit of a deep thinker or something. But so I see him quite a lot now. Episode 140 was called A to Z of Sci-Fi Art Part 1. And episode 141 was called A to Z of Sci-Fi Art Part 2. And this was an Imagine FX magazine article. I just went through it, and what they did was they had each letter of the alphabet, and like A was say aliens, B was Battlestar Galactica or something. So that was cool. I just went through talking about each thing. Episode 149 was called Not Drawing Enough, which is all about, basically I started thinking I'm not drawing enough. So I was just talking about that really. Episode 143, Christmas Memories. So this must have been Christmas 20... I would say Christmas 2020... Yeah, Christmas 2020. And I was talking about
my memories from Christmas. That's quite cool. I like this one. What episode was this? I've stopped putting numbers on them. Episode 144 was 3 cool female looks, shoujo fashion. Again, another article. Now this is good. So episode 45 was psychedelics part 1, which was all about the before. So this is when I started. This is my first ever experience of psychedelics. So far, it's my one and only. And I did an episode talking about what I was thinking about before doing it. And then the next one, I did an episode having done it. So it was quite interesting how what I thought was going to happen was nothing like what actually happened. So before I did it, I thought it was going to be this big visual experience, like loads of visuals and entities and everything. What actually happened was there was darkness, and yet I could see everything, which is really weird to explain it. But it was quite funny. I went into it wanting visuals. I got out of it no visuals at all, and I love that because what it says to me is it's the psychedelics don't give you what you want; it gives you what you need. I like that. So what did episode 44, 5? That was episode 46, and then I went through a series of psychedelic talking, because what happened was for a whole week I was like connected to something after that psychedelics. I was like channeling things. So I did one about time loops, the new earth and free will, another one about paradoxes, entanglements and the numbers 369. I did one about point particles, waves and the blue light. I did another one about who is Sula, which was this entity that came to me in a lucid dream, talking about dying and the process of life and death. There was another one about the physical is an illusion, God, devil and the timeless. And I did another one about future changes the past. This is to do with like time loops, 2 timelines basically. Particles in DNA and how DNA stores time. And then, look at this. A fart sums it up perfectly. Because a fart is like pointless, I suppose. But yeah, it's got everything in it. Yeah. Infinity and the pyramids. Numbers are visual. 3 equals E. I started realising how numbers they're the same as letters. So 3 is E back to front. And then if you look into it, you can see they're all the same. Like the number 8, infinity. It's almost like the numbers become a symbol. Talking about blood is the timeless. History repeating itself. Karma and living your truth. And then we got back into the podcast, which was time for action. The thumbnail for this was a tank about to run over. There's a bloke, I can't remember what he was called, but there's some in the past there was this bloke who, what he did was he stood in front of a tank, and basically the tank had to stop, otherwise it was going to run him over. Now what's weird about this is a lot of people remember that bloke getting run over, which makes them think that it was some sort of Mandela. You know that thing. There's a thing called the Mandela effect, which is where people remember things differently. So one of them for me is Looney Tunes. I remember Looney Tunes growing up as being Looney Tunes, as in TOONS. But if you look at it now, it says Looney Tunes, as in Looney Tunes, which doesn't make sense because Looney Tunes is like tunes. That makes more sense because it's cartoons. So what people think is that they've actually changed the timelines, shifted us onto different timelines, and we've got memories of things that have happened which haven't. But that bloke. So that was all about like we've got to now become that bloke, standing in front of a tank, willing to sacrifice ourselves for the greater good, I suppose. Yeah. That was episode 147. 148 was our ancient past, talking about the pyramids and stuff, because I'm convinced that the past is the future. So it's like a loop somehow. Episode 149 was an article called Clean Character Design with Peniel Oram, another one of my favouriteest artists. And then the week after, well, that was, what was that? That was episode 150. Episode 150 was Painting with Gouache with Peniel Oram. A celebration for episode 150. And she did a little mermaid. Beautiful shapes she's got. Episode 151 was The Power of Now with Eckhart Tolle, which was it's a guide to spiritual enlightenment. But I was basically talking about the book, a book called The Power of Now, which is brilliant. And he's actually created another book called The New Earth. I've got it. I haven't read that yet. I should read that. But he's cool, he is. And also, I started looking into him online. He's got like meditations and stuff. Guided meditations. This was called, the next one, which was episode 152, was called That's What She Said. Clips from Inspirational People. What I did on this was I took little clips from, inspirational podcasts and things, and I was going to do another one of these. I've already got all the videos written out, but I never got around to doing it, because the thing with these is it takes a lot of time, because you've got to go through the video, taking out the clip, so it takes a lot of time. But I do like those ones, because it's just a way of like sharing other people's videos, I suppose. This was episode 153. I started doing these I started calling them walking talks, and this one was about child abuse, spontaneity, and English accents. So what I did on these is they're walking talks. So I just go for a walk and talk around nature and talk about things. Part 1. So we had part 1. The next one, this is episode 154, was an art book article called Gesture and Pose with Adele Hem, part 1. Episode 153 was part 2. And we're just talking about gesture and pose. Like gesture, because again, for me, gesture drawing I think is key to capturing the essence in characters, because the gesture is where all the sort of energy is. So if you get the energy in there, the character's going to be alive when you start adding your structure. Episode 156, Face Masks and Freedom. This was part 4. This was when the UK started going on protests and things, so it's getting a bit heated. Oh look, episode 157, Jesus, who was he? Was he a bloke who meditated his nuts off and became like super connected, or was he a spirit that came into the earth, or was he both? Was he a bloke who meditated and became like super enlightened, died, and then came back in as a spirit? I don't know, but that's interesting. Episode 158, Noah's Ark, and I've put was it a digital database of DNA? Yeah, was Noah's Ark a digital database of DNA? Just something to think about, because I think if we're inside some sort of virtual reality, all Noah's Ark could just be collecting the data of all the species, so that when you reset the program, you've still got all the data, because you only need one of each creature to recreate it. It's like a drawing. You've got a sketchbook full of characters. You only need one drawing of that character to bring it back to life. Episode 159 was sometimes it's better to not be lucid in your dreams, because I think if you're not lucid in your dreams, you're dealing with your subconscious, with like the shadow self. So I feel like you can actually do deeper work sometimes when you're not lucid. So I was just thinking about that. Episode 160 was probability-based beings and the power of free will. And this goes into, well, again, that thing about, I think we're inside of our own universe. Everyone else is a probability-based being. So basically, if you don't do anything, you're going to just become a probability-based being yourself. Because you're just going to go along with the probability. For instance, if you don't say, let's say you don't have a shave, the probability is you're going to grow hair. So you've got to take the action of shaving to stop the probability happening of having a shave, of like your hair growing. It's the same here with everything. If you want to become an artist, you've got to take action, because the probability, if the probability is set that you're not going to become an artist, if you don't do anything, you won't. The next one, episode 161. What is the out-of-body experience? Again, is it a physical thing? Are you actually going into physical realities, or is it all mind generated, or is that actually the same thing? And we don't really understand the connection between the physical and the mind. The next one was A Storm is Coming, episode 162. Yeah, is that not true, what's happening now? A storm is coming. Episode 163, Are We Already Dead? Because I wonder sometimes, is it possible we're dead? We don't realise it. And these are what earthbound spirits are called. Earthbound spirits are basically spirits that have died, and they don't realise they've died. How mad is that? So you do wonder, what if we've died and we don't realise it? The microchip was an advanced AI, was episode 164. That's where I talked about how I think the microchip got seeded on the planet with the agenda of taking over the planet. So the microchip, which seems like a simple piece of sort of equipment, actually had some sort of consciousness to it. So when you create an AI, it is using the humans to create a creature that will bring it to life, which is what the mushrooms did. The mushrooms, I would say, used the plants to create a creature, or they used like an ape or an animal or something. They used organic to bring themselves to life. Maybe like the humans are just like a stepping stone. Episode 163 was Nature versus Technology. So I was talking about like fantasy art versus sci-fi art, but also like basically actual nature and technology. Because like they're different. Like nature, beautiful sounds. Technology, normally not so nice sounds. 166, the power of psychedelics. I was talking about psychedelics. Episode 167, Earth was originally the reptilians. So I think this goes back to the dinosaurs. I think the dinosaurs are signs of dragons, which are they're in all the myths and legends. I wonder whether humans killed off the dragons, which was actually them sort of taking over the planet from the original inhabitants, and they've made the story that, well, they've turned most of the dragons they've turned into fantasy, so they make you think it's not real. And all the remains of dinosaurs, they say, they're like millions of years ago. Episode 168 was morning and night routines. Super important. 169 was a catch-up episode talking about time and money. So again, I've got this feeling that time and money are linked. So in other words, if you're spending time, you're probably going to be making money. If you're spending money, you can make time. Basically, you can buy time by like outsourcing things, and you can also buy. I don't know. Well, somehow they're linked. I'll talk about it on that episode. Episode 170 was Imagine FX article, 15 tips for better character design with David Melling. And again, characters, they're my favourite. I love characters. The next episode 171, Storytelling and Atmosphere, with Raquel Villanueva. Oh, this was nice. She had a little character, a little old man, and he had a sort of softness to him. Tender he was. Episode 172, Studying from Art Books versus Online Courses. So I'll just talk about things like that. Confrontation versus Bad Habits was episode 173, because all this stuff that's happening in the world is forcing people into confrontation. Either you're doing your confrontation or you're not. Which again, if you don't do the confrontation if it's needed, you're going to end up following the probability of whatever. The confrontation is like free will. Episode 174, another character design quarterly magazine. This was Angry Cloud with Emma Cormary. She basically created an angry cloud. Little character. That was cool. The Garden of Eden was episode 175. There's something to that, you know. There is something to that, but I think the Garden of Eden, for me, it's something to do with cloning. But it also, in a weird way, proves that the Earth already existed. That's what I think. I feel like the Garden of Eden was some sort of like little pen, like a little farm or something on the Earth. Something. Discipline was episode 176, and on the thumbnail we had a seagull flying off with my apple. This is quite cool. Selling Your Soul was episode 177. Oh, that was cool. I walked around a graveyard on that one. So, episode 178, Returning to Your Childhood Home. That is, well, on this one, the thumbnail was the house I grew up in, where I was born. I was actually born inside of that house, which was quite nice. It was very strange though, going back to childhood, going back to the house you grew up in. Like, weird, because it was the same, but it was totally different. Episode 179, Crafting Adorable Characters with Fabiola Colavecchio. And he created this cool little, like a furball character. But again, full of so much character. You Can't Do Everything was episode 180. And I always say you can't do everything, but you can do anything. It goes back to that thing of focus. Like, focus. You got to focus, but you got to focus, but part of you doesn't want to. That's what's annoying about it. Being indecisive, that kind of goes into it. Like, you want to focus on something, but because something inside of your head is saying, but I also want to do this, it sometimes stops you from being able to make decisions. So episode 181 was being indecisive. 182 was taking Bobby for a walk. This was cool. Basically, me and my mum took Bobby the dog for a walk and had a little chat, really, which was nice. A Dump and Doodle was episode 183. This is where I started doing these things where I just start doodling in my sketchbook and talking, basically, like brain dumps. Episode 184 was a walk and talk. I can't remember what that was about, but episode 185 was a Dump and Doodle 2. So what's cool about this is the things you draw are quite strange. Like, sort of, you wonder, where did that come from? Episode 186, the Earth isn't round. So you start wondering, is the Earth round or flat? And the answer is, you don't know. You will never know for sure until you yourself go out there and have a look at it. Because everyone can say it's round because they've been out there, but until you've done it, you don't really know. 187, another Dump and Doodle. This was about spirit possession. So I'm starting to realise that the thoughts in your head are actually spirits, which is, I think, is linked to the shadow self as well. A Dump and Doodle Poo was the next one, episode 188. And episode 189 was Smoke Screens which was another walk and talk. That was a nice one. A Dump and Doodle Boo, when I was talking about video games. That was 190. And I also drew a picture of a pyramid linked to the head, which is quite telling. That almost as if something went on in the pyramids, which is linked to our head, which I think is linked to spirits, because I think the pyramids are a way of spirits coming in and out of this reality, and I think they come in through your head. Like, I think the pyramids are some sort of time machine, interdimensional something. The next podcast was called The Personality Test with Ilse Harting, which was episode 191. She created cool little characters, completely different though. One was like fun and crazy, the other was posh and elegant. Which I like that, because they still look the same style. WTF is going on? What the is going on here? Psychic abilities, fear control, and social bubble, I think it was called, the society bubble. That was 192. Episode 193 was all about crop circles. 194 was a Dump and Doodle about Formula 1, because Lewis Hamilton had just lost the World Championship through, well, what I would call race fixing, and it brought up a lot of emotions for me. So talk about that. Episode 194 was Christmas with my mum. That was a fun one. We were just talking about Christmas things. Episode 196, goals, death and video games. So once again talking about video games. This was a walk and talk in the rain. So it was raining outside. Episode 197 was a Dump and Doodle about the shadow self, and how I think the shadow is a spirit inside of you. Like, that's what thoughts are. Episode 198 was Are Aliens Us from the Future? So Mark Anthony Peterson on the Event Horizon podcast, he said he wondered whether aliens were us from the future coming back in time. And I thought, well, what if actually they're actually aliens or us from the past going into the future, which I think is linked to the pyramids, and it's also linked to the oceans somehow, but it's the pyramids. Those pyramids are very they're hiding a secret. I'm sure of it. And then last week's episode, The Matrix Resurrections, which was all about the Matrix, the new Matrix, which I thought was cool. And that is basically it. And now we're on this one, boing, which is episode 100. I love the smell of poppers. It smells cool. I'll tell you what though, boing. God, that was a loud one. I do apologise if that hurts your ears. I didn't think about that. I hope you enjoyed this podcast though. It was a big one, that's what she says. But lilDENNiS, he's decided it's game over. Boing. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I want to say thank you so much for listening to this thing. And if you got to the end of it, well done, because I don't know how long this one's going to be. Well, I think it's nearly 3 hours. So it's the longest podcast ever that I've ever done. But lilDENNiS is saying goodbye, and we shall be back next week. And well, the goal now is I've got to interview guests on the podcast. It is a priority. It really is. I know it is. It's a lot more important than I think. Well, I know it's important, but it's even more important than I think it is. It is super important. So I'm gonna find a way to do it, and I'm gonna go and eat this cake now. Me and my mum is gonna eat this cake. It's gonna be lovely. This birthday cake. So hope you enjoyed it. This week's inspirational quote is actually gonna. Well, I've got two. I've got two little quotes. The first one, which is, where is it? Yeah, look. This isn't what it's going to be, but it's podcasts are music for the mind, which I don't know who said that. It's an anonymous quote, so nobody knows who said it. But podcasts are music for the mind. I love that because I feel like podcasts are super powerful, but the word music makes it feel like a sort of a rhythm and fun and a creative thing. So it's almost like it's like a fun, creative way of connecting. But this week's inspirational quote actually goes to Joseph Campbell, and it's the quote that is on the website. It's maybe my favouriteest quote, and it's basically no, it's not. It's we must let go of the life we have planned, so as to accept the one that is waiting for us, which I think beautifully sums up this podcast. It sums up the podcast. It sums up my art. It sums up my transition as well. Like, you start out thinking you need a willy. No, you need to get rid of the willy. But that's not the way it's going to be. You think you're going to be doing these characters. You end up doing realistic pencil drawings. You think the podcast is going to be all about art and nothing else, and it ends up being different, and yet it's still sort of the same. So, like, we must let go of the life we have planned, so as to accept the one that is waiting for us. Joseph Campbell. Woo! Mum, look what lilDENNiS got us.
Eh?
Look what lilDENNiS got us. It's cool, isn't it? Hello.
Sorry?
Hello. You're going to be on the podcast. Episode 200.
Sorry?
Episode 200.
200?
Yeah. Are you proud of me?
Mm.
Oh, yeah. Are you going to eat this cake then?
Thank you.
Oh, what?
No, thanks.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
That's nice, guys. Thanks, Dennis. Good, Dennis.
Yeah.